It is outrageous and so misjudged that people's campaigning and people's whipping up of concerns for Palestine means a rise in antisemitism and a climate of fear which has invaded not only every part of British life but also specifically the life of Jewish students across our country. There's a survey which was carried out by YouGov and King's College for the campaign against anti-Semitism, and it's found that 8 out of 10 people felt intimidated as a Jew by the anti-Israel protests and the messages and social media blitz during the Gaza conflict. And this simply shouldn't be happening in our country. And I don't think it's about trying to provide more rhetoric. It's about trying to provide better education. So the move from criticizing the Netanyahu government to anti-Semitism is a very small step. And it's a step which is taken joyfully and gleefully by a lot of ignorant people. I think it's perfectly reasonable to criticize the Netanyahu government. I don't think it's reasonable in any way to indulge in anti-Semitism, and it needs to be called out. And it needs to be stopped. Increasingly, a lot of Jewish families feel they don't have a future in the UK. 59% of British Jews felt they didn't have, felt they had a long-term future in the UK. This has dropped from 66%. So there's an increasing number of people who feel disenfranchised. And that's appalling. We need to restore trust in the Jewish community. We need to restore proper education around our schools. I think this means, in practice, we need to have a serious look at what schools are teaching about Judaism and about Islam particularly. It's within living memory. When I was at school, the only subject which was compulsory under law was religious studies. Now it's one of those subjects which is regarded as a Mickey Mouse subject. And it's taught so casually. I went into a school not so long ago, and I was appalled at the standard of teaching of religious studies. In fact, I took it over for a short while. And what worried me so much was the bias and the textbooks. There's a great textbook on Judaism by Ari Forta, a man who certainly knows what he's talking about, but it's old now, and it's been replaced by such a lot of rubbish. There were some good books on Islam. What I see in the textbooks in the schools that I've visited recently is a mishmash of rubbish about rites of passage and some serious misunderstanding about the various forms of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And I remember particularly when I was doing teacher training how I was increasingly irritated, and I wasn't the only person irritated. This is back in the day, by some of the staff who were trying to tell us about our subject. And they were just wrong. And they were approaching things with an evangelical Christian bias. And they made assumptions about what we knew. And I used to sit at the back with a group of Jewish students, and we were howling with frustration almost all the time. If that was bad in the 1980s, early 1990s, I think, I can't remember when it was, how much worse it's got now when religious education has dissolved into a form of philosophy and ethics. And that itself is pretty appallingly taught. And we need to have a revolution in teaching, because if we don't teach these subjects, and people very often sort of are dismissive because they think religious education is about teaching faith. Religious education is about teaching culture. Religious education is about the culture that has been passed on to us. And so much of it is informed by our interaction with these, particularly these three great religions. Christianity, and I was talking to somebody today about the evolution, why Latin is so important in law, because to be a clerk in the Middle Ages and right the way through to pretty well Shakespeare's time was to have been educated by the church and to have read Latin. And a clerk was pretty well the lowest form of holy orders that would provide a tonsure, which was sort of proof in the street that you could read and write, and that you understood Latin, and that you understood the law. A career. And what I think people fail to realize is the richness of Islam. As we're approaching Ramadan, I think this is something that we should be praising and calling out. Without the Islamic Renaissance, or actually it wasn't really a Renaissance, it was a first birth in the 8th century of scholarship and research, collection, to have the best libraries, and to translate everything into common language of Arabic. And from that, the Muslim scholars took their research, took their discoveries about Greek and Indian mathematics, putting them together, and it percolated up through Muslim Spain into the medieval Christian world, and informed people like Thomas Aquinas. It was through those collections of Plato's works, translated from Arabic back into Latin, that Thomas Aquinas had access to the works of Aristotle and Plato. And it wasn't until a little bit later that Western theologians and philosophers had access to Greek, because they didn't understand the language. And then the original texts, and then the burst of the Italian Renaissance, fired up by a discovery of the classical past. And that's just Christianity and Islam. Judaism underpins both of those traditions. And it's from Judaism that we get so many of our bedrock traditions of ethics and morality, but also concepts of kingship, the anointing of the king in Westminster Cathedral, in Westminster Abbey, was a ceremony predicated, based on the anointing of a king in ancient Israel. We need to have a much more secure understanding of religion. And without it, and without that celebration of the cultural heritage that we all draw on, we are the much poorer, and we will not understand each other. It's not about converting. It's not really about faith. It's about understanding culture and respecting culture and how that culture informs belief and has developed and enriched our history. And so much of our art, so much of our paintings, our music would not be here without the patronage of religion. If you move from the UK to the great mosques of Istanbul and walk around, I know you might walk around Hagia Sophia, but just walk across the pavement and you will see immediately the impact of Sinan the architect. The most extraordinary celebrations of architecture and design and pattern, and we're still drawing from that inspiration all these years later.